You really thought you could walk in here and embarrass me in front of my people?" He didn't raise his voice. Men like Dominic Varela never had to. The quieter he got, the more dangerous the room became, and right now the ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel had gone so still that the chandelier above them seemed to hold its own breath. "Look at you," he said, and the word look landed like a boot on glass. Swollen, pathetic, wearing a dress that doesn't even fit anymore. She stood at the center of that silence, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach, and said, "I just wanted to return this." She held out a small gold locket, the one he'd given her the night he asked her to trust him, the one she'd worn every day for 14 months. He looked at it the way you look at something you've already thrown away. Every eye in that room was on her. 200 guests, business partners, politicians, people whose names appeared in newspapers. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. She set the locket on the table in front of him, gently. The way you set down something you've decided to stop carrying, and she turned and walked toward the door. And here is the question that will stay with you long after this story ends. What do you do when the most powerful man in the room decides you are nothing? Do you fight? Do you collapse? Or do you simply disappear? Because she did disappear. For 7 years she vanished so completely that even the people he paid to find her came back empty-handed. And when she came back, it wasn't with anger. It was with everything. But to understand what she walked back in with, you have to understand what she walked away from. And that story begins not in a ballroom, but in a bakery in a small town in central Italy. 12 years before anyone knew her name, the town of Mirabella had one main street, one church, and one bakery that mattered: Forno Russo, which had been in the Russo family for 3 generations. Elena Russo grew up behind the counter, learning to read customer moods before she could read books. Her mother, Caterina, baked the bread. Her grandmother, Nana B., handled the money and the gossip in equal measure. And Elena swept the floors, measured the flour, and somewhere between the ages of 8 and 18 became the kind of person who noticed everything and said very little. She had a gift, that's the only word for it. She could look at a set of numbers, an invoice, a supply ledger, a quarterly tally on a napkin, and see patterns the way musicians see notes, the rhythm of where money was going wrong, the gap between what something cost and what it could cost, the margin hidden inside a process nobody had bothered to question. Her math teacher, a retired accountant named Signor Padua, told her mother in her 2nd year of secondary school that Elena was the sharpest financial mind he'd encountered in 30 years of teaching. Her mother nodded, went home, and told Elena to also learn how to make the sfogliatelle properly, because a woman needed something reliable. She loved them both, the numbers and the pastries, with an equal, uncomplicated devotion. She earned a scholarship to the University of Bologna. She studied economics and financial accounting. She graduated top of her class, received 2 job offers in Milan, and turned them both down because her father had a bad heart and the bakery needed someone to manage the books. She stayed. For 4 years she ran Forno Russo's finances with such precision that the profit margin nearly doubled. She negotiated a supply contract with a regional flour cooperative that saved them 12% annually. She implemented an inventory system on a second-hand laptop that reduced waste by 1/3. She was happy. Not the spectacular kind of happy that makes for a good story, but the quiet, solid kind that fills your chest in the morning when you open a door you know you belong to. That was the world she had. Small, warm, hers, and she was 26 years old when a man with silver cufflinks came into Forno Russo on a Tuesday morning and ordered a cornetto and an espresso and changed everything. His name was Marco Varela. He was 31, handsome in a way that felt assembled rather than born, and he was in Mirabella on business that he described in charming, deliberately vague terms. He came back the next morning. And the one after that. By the end of the first week, he had learned Elena's name and the name of every pastry in the case. By the end of the second week, he had asked her to dinner. She said no. He came back the next morning and brought her a small book about financial modeling that he'd driven 40 minutes to find at a bookstore in the next town, because he'd noticed the accounting textbook she kept beneath the register. She looked at the book, then at him, and said, "This is a first-year university text. I have 3 of these." He said, "I didn't know what you already had. I just wanted to show you I was paying attention." She said yes to dinner. He was not dishonest with her about who he was. Exactly, he told her he ran a portfolio of businesses. He told her his family had complicated money and a complicated history. He told her the name Varela meant something in certain circles that it didn't mean in others. He was careful with language the way powerful men learn to be, not lying, precisely, but building a room with no windows. And Elena, who was brilliant with numbers and inexperienced with men who'd spent their lives learning how to be loved, walked into that room and thought it was warm. Within 6 months she had moved to Milan. Within 8 months she had left the ordinary world of spreadsheets and supply contracts and stepped, without fully understanding what she was stepping into the orbit of the Varela family. Dominic Varela, Marco's father, patriarch, a man who made the word authority feel small, received her once in his study, looked at her for approximately 90 seconds, and thereafter pretended she did not exist. But what she didn't know in those early months was that while Dominic pretended she didn't exist, he was watching her very carefully. Because Dominic Varela had spent 50 years building something that required above everything people who could not be bought and could not be fooled. And he had learned, slowly and against his will, that this woman from Mirabella with flour sometimes still in her hair, this woman could not be fooled. She found a discrepancy. That was how it started. She wasn't looking for it. She was simply helping Marco organize some documents for a property acquisition, tedious clerical work. And she found a pattern in the invoice structures that indicated someone in the Varela financial network was skimming. Not dramatically. Not clumsily. Whoever it was had been doing it for years, in amounts small enough to pass beneath every audit, using a rotation of shell vendors that mimicked legitimate expenses so precisely that it had survived 5 years of external review. She showed Marco, quietly, the way you'd show someone a crack in the wall of a house they loved. He went pale. He took the documents to his father. 3 days later, Dominic Varela invited Elena to dinner. Just the two of them. He asked her to walk him through how she'd found it. She did. He asked her 3 follow-up questions, all of them precisely targeted. All of them the questions a man with a deep financial education would ask. She answered all 3 correctly, and then, because she could not help herself, she told him there was a second anomaly she'd noticed while reviewing the rest of the ledgers, smaller but structurally identical, which suggested the same actor had used a backup method. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're wasted in that bakery." She said, "I know." For 2 years after that, she worked inside the Varela organization's financial operations in a capacity that was never given a formal title. She restructured 3 shell-holding structures that had become legally vulnerable. She designed a compliance framework that passed federal regulatory review so cleanly that the reviewing official later told a colleague it was among the best organized private financial architectures he'd seen. She found 2 more instances of internal theft, both of which were resolved in ways she chose not to ask about. She also fell in love, fully and without reservation, with Marco Varela, who was not the worst man she could have chosen and not the best, and who told her on the night they confirmed her pregnancy that he was going to marry her and give their child a name that meant something in the world. 3 weeks later, Marco was dead. A car accident on the A8 motorway outside Milan. 11:47 on a Thursday night. She got the call at 12 past midnight. She sat on the edge of the bed in their apartment and held the phone against her chest for a very long time. The grief was total. She had learned in 2 years inside the Varela world how to read rooms and keep her face still, but grief arrived before the stillness could. She cried for 3 days in a way she had never cried before and has never cried since. Nana B drove up from Mirabella and sat with her and did not try to say anything useful, which was the most useful thing anyone could have done. And then on the 4th day, Dominic Varela called. He did not say he was sorry. He said there were practical matters that needed to be addressed, and he would like her to come to the family home the following morning. She came. She sat across from him in the same study where he had received her 18 months before, and he looked at her with the same studied calm and told her that in light of what had happened, the arrangement she had with the organization would be concluded. The apartment was Marco's. It would revert to the estate. Her work on the financial structures was appreciated and had been compensated accordingly. He had prepared a severance. It was generous. It was also a dismissal, and both of them understood that perfectly. She said, "I'm 4 months pregnant with your grandchild." He said, "Marco is gone. The child's legitimacy will depend on arrangements I am not currently in a position to make. I suggest you return to Mirabella." She sat with that for a moment, the words, the math of them, the weight. Then she said, "All right." She got up, shook his hand because she had been raised by women who showed no man that he had broken them, and she left. But what she didn't know, and what Dominic could not have known, was that in those 24 months inside the Varela financial apparatus, Elena Russo had learned something beyond the structures themselves. She had learned the coordinates. She had learned which holding company contained what. She had learned which agreements were legally sound and which ones were constructed on foundations that a good lawyer, armed with the right documents, could reach into and pull. She knew where the floor was soft. And she remembered everything. She went back to Mirabella. She had her baby, a daughter, born on a Wednesday morning in April, with dark eyes and a grip so fierce the midwife laughed. She named her Beatrice, after Nana B, and she held her in the delivery room with the specific quiet of a woman who has decided what she is going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment. She spent the next 6 months recovering, nursing, sleeping when the baby slept, and very quietly in the hours before dawn and after Beatrice went down, building something. She had a laptop. She had her memory. She had the legal pad she'd kept during her 2 years with the Varellas, filled with her own shorthand that only she could read. And she had a name. The name of a lawyer in Rome. A woman named Silvia Marchetti, who had spent the better part of a decade building a practice around financial crimes that the government either couldn't or wouldn't prosecute. Silvia had a reputation in certain rooms for being, as one judge had privately described her, structurally undefeatable. Elena wrote her a letter, not an email. A letter, 6 pages, handwritten, describing in precise and documented detail the 2 internal theft schemes she'd uncovered, the shell-holding structures she'd worked on and why they were legally vulnerable, and the specific regulatory filings she believed contained material misrepresentations. She attached 3 pages of numerical tables she had reconstructed from memory with source citations. Silvia Marchetti read the letter in one sitting. She called Elena the next morning and said, "When can you come to Rome?" 6 years. That is how long it took. That is a number worth sitting with. Not 6 dramatic years of courtroom speeches and turning point revelations. 6 years of depositions, regulatory filings, counter-filings, procedural delays, administrative appeals, jurisdictional challenges, and 3 separate attempts by Varela's legal team, one of the most expensive white-collar defense firms in Italy, to have the evidence declared inadmissible on grounds that Elena had obtained it as an employee without formal legal authorization. The argument was technically creative and practically devastating if it succeeded, all of Elena's original documentation. The 6-page letter, the numerical tables reconstructed from memory, the supplemental memos she had compiled over the first 2 years of working with Silvia, all of it would be unusable. The entire case rested on it. Silvia defeated all 3 motions. The first took 7 months. The second, which came down in March of the 3rd year, was 47 pages long and is now studied in 2 Italian law schools as a landmark ruling on whistleblower evidence standards. The third was defeated in 11 weeks, because by that point the court was thoroughly unimpressed with the argument and Silvia had refined her counter to a kind of elegant, devastating efficiency that occupied 16 pages and cited the first 2 rulings against the same client. Elena was present at the courthouse when the 3rd motion was denied. She sat in a hallway on a wooden bench with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and listened to Silvia summarize the ruling over the phone, because Silvia had been inside while Elena waited with Beatrice, who was 4 years old and had brought a coloring book. When Silvia came out of the courtroom, she looked at Elena and said simply, 3 for 3. We're clean. Elena nodded. Beatrice looked up from her coloring book and asked if they were going to stop for gelato. They did. During those 6 years, Elena did not sit still. She earned her CPA certification in the second year, taking the exams in 2 sittings while Beatrice was in nursery school and Nana B stayed in the apartment to cover the afternoons. She took on 3 small business clients, a florist, a plumber, a family-run clothing alteration shop, and managed their books with the same precision she'd brought to everything else. She charged them modestly. She did not tell them who she was or why she was in Mirabella, and they did not ask, because small towns understand implicitly. When someone has arrived with something heavy and needs the ordinary rhythm of work to keep them upright. She taught herself enough contract law to be useful in Sylvia's office on the days she drove to Rome, a 4-hour round trip she made once a month for 4 years, leaving at 6 in the morning and returning by 9 at night. Counting the kilometers the way you count something you've committed to. She read to Beatrice every night, every single night, starting with picture books and moving through fairy tales and then, by the time Beatrice was 5, into the real stories, the ones about people who built things from nothing, who found something worth protecting and protected it. Beatrice was 4 years old when she first asked where her father was. Elena told her the truth, in words a 4-year-old could hold, that her father had loved her before he could meet her, and that he was gone, and that there were people in the world who had not behaved well, and that the family was making sure they answered for it. Beatrice looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "Are you winning?" Elena said, "Yes," she meant it. Now go back and watch the moment she placed that locket on the table. Because that wasn't impulsiveness. That was a woman who had already done everything, who had already filed every document and built every case and moved every piece. And who walked into that ballroom on the night of the Varela Foundation's annual charity gala, an event attended by 200 of the most connected people in northern Italy, not to beg and not to confront and not to make a scene. She walked in because she wanted to give him the chance to see, one last time, what he was about to lose. The locket. The child. The grace she was still offering him, and he called her swollen and pathetic. She had been in the room for 4 minutes. She was wearing a navy dress that did not fit perfectly because she was 7 months pregnant with her second child, a child whose father was a good, quiet architect named Luca who loved her in the simple, unperformative way that follows real suffering, and who was waiting for her in the parking lot downstairs with the engine running and a thermos of chamomile tea. She was not there because she was weak. She was there because she was finishing. She set the locket on the table and she left. And what she didn't know, or rather what Dominic Varela did not know, was that while he was calling her pathetic in front of 200 witnesses, the Italian Financial Intelligence Unit, known as the UIF, was simultaneously executing a coordinated search warrant at 3 Varela Group offices in Milan, 1 in Turin, and the registered offices of 7 associated holding companies. The warrants had been issued at 9 o'clock that morning. The gala had started at 7. By the time Elena walked out of the Meridian Grand Hotel into the cool October air and climbed into the passenger seat and told Luca simply, "Let's go home," the accountants and financial investigators assigned to case file 2019 CR 7741 were already seated at conference tables inside Varela offices, working through boxes of documents that matched, almost perfectly, the structures Elena had described in her original 6-page handwritten letter to Silvia Marchetti 7 years before. Luca handed her the chamomile tea. She took a sip. Outside, the city moved around them in its ordinary indifferent way. Inside, somewhere behind them, through the lobby glass and the chandelier and 200 stunned faces, Dominic Varela's phone was ringing for the first time. He would not stop receiving calls for the next 18 months. The investigation that followed became known in Italian financial and legal circles simply as the Russo disclosure, a name that attached itself because it was Elena's original letter, and the 6 years of documented supplemental evidence compiled by her and Silvia's team, that formed the evidentiary spine of the entire prosecution. It was not a dramatic name. Elena would have preferred something less personal, but Silvia told her that accuracy mattered, and accuracy here meant giving credit where it was due. The charges, when they were formally filed, ran to 43 counts across 4 defendants. Dominic Varela, the Varela Group's chief financial officer, a man named Gennaro Foti who had been with the organization for 19 years, a senior partner at the external accounting firm that had audited the books for 11 years, and a regional official in the Lombardy tax authority whose name had appeared in none of Elena's original documents but surfaced during the investigation through a financial connection she had noted in passing in one of her supplemental memos, almost as an afterthought, 2 years into the process. The charges included tax evasion amounting to 14 million euros over an 8-year period, money laundering through a series of construction and hospitality acquisitions, and the filing of materially false statements to federal regulators on 6 separate occasions. There was also a separate civil proceeding filed by Silvia in parallel, asserting that the estate of Marco Varela, and by extension his heir, Beatrice Russo Varela, had been deliberately and fraudulently excluded from assets that rightfully belonged to her under Italian succession law. That second proceeding was the one that kept Elena awake at night. Not because she doubted the legal merits, Silvia was confident enough for both of them, but because it was the one that was about Beatrice. Everything else, the fines and the charges and the regulatory consequences, that was about justice in the abstract. The succession proceeding was about her daughter, about whether the little girl who asked, "Are you winning?" at age 4 would grow up with what her father had intended her to have. She was winning. The criminal trial began in January of the following year and lasted 11 months. It was covered extensively by the Italian financial press, moderately by the national news, and intensely by one investigative journalist at a digital publication called L'Indipendente named Francesca Rao, who had been following the Varela organization for 3 years before the charges were filed and who, when the Russo disclosure became public knowledge, wrote a 2-part profile of Elena that was read by 800,000 people in its first week and shared more than 90,000 times. Francesca's writing was precise and unsentimental, which was why Elena agreed to speak with her. The profile did not sensationalize. It did not use words like brave or inspiring in the way that journalism sometimes reaches for those words as substitutes for accuracy. What it did was tell the truth about what Elena had done, what she had noticed, what she had documented, what she had carried through 6 years of legal process while raising a child and building a career, and not once, in any interview or filing or public statement, saying an unkind word about the man who had called her swollen and pathetic in a ballroom. That restraint was the thing that seemed to move people most. The comments under the article, 93,000 of them in 10 days, returned again and again to the same note: she never got angry, she just got right. The verdict, when it came, was delivered on a Thursday afternoon in November, 11 years almost to the month after Elena had first walked into the orbit of the Varela family. Dominic Varela was convicted on 31 of the 43 counts. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison, reduced on appeal to 6, a reduction that Silvia had anticipated and accounted for in her original civil filing strategy. Gennaro Foti received 5 years. The external accounting firm partner received 3 and a substantial personal fine. The regional official received 4 years and was barred from public service for life. The Varela Group itself was ordered to pay a combined penalty of 42 million euros, including back taxes, interest, civil penalties, and legal costs. Its primary holding company was placed under court-appointed administration for a period of 5 years, during which its assets would be assessed, restructured, and partially liquidated to satisfy the judgment. The civil succession preceding Beatrice's was settled out of court 2 months after the criminal verdict, for an amount that Silvia described to Elena simply as more than sufficient. Elena never disclosed the exact figure publicly, and she never will. What she has said once in an interview with Francesca Rao that was conducted 2 years after the verdict is this: Beatrice will never have to choose between what she needs and what she can afford. That is what her father would have wanted. That is what I made sure of. But the numbers that came out through the public court record told their own story. The Varela Group, at the height of its operation, had managed assets estimated at 380 million euros. The penalties, the forced liquidation, the withdrawal of institutional partners who could not afford the reputational association, and the 18 months of leadership vacuum during the criminal trial reduced that to something closer to 90 million, a figure from which the organization never fully recovered. 3 banks that had maintained lending relationships with Varela Group entities terminated those relationships within 60 days of the verdict. A charitable foundation that had used the Varela name in exchange for annual donations voted to rename itself. A business association that had given Dominic its Entrepreneur of the Year award in 2015 quietly removed his name from the plaque in their lobby. Quietly, and then loudly. Because by the time the verdict came down, a great deal of what had once been done quietly was being done loudly. The Francesca Rao profile had introduced something into the public conversation that is difficult to put back once it enters: the specific, documented, human story behind an abstract financial crime. Before the profile, the Varela case was a news item about tax evasion and money laundering, significant but distant, the kind of story most people read and then set down because it does not seem to touch their lives. After the profile, it became something else. It became the story of a woman who had been told she was nothing and had spent 7 years proving she was the most consequential person in the room. Comments on news articles, viral posts, a hashtag that trended in Italy for 3 days and generated global pickup from English-language news outlets who summarized the profile for audiences who couldn't read the original. A short video clip, someone had filmed the moment Elena arrived at the courthouse on the day of the verdict, alone except for Beatrice beside her holding her hand, wearing a navy coat and walking with the particular unhurried calm of someone who has already done the hardest part, that was viewed 4 million times across platforms in 72 hours. She didn't see the clip until Francesca texted her a link. She watched it once, then she put her phone away and drove home and helped Beatrice with her homework. Luca had made dinner. Their younger child, a boy they'd named Martino, was asleep in the next room. The apartment they'd moved into after the settlement in a quiet neighborhood in Bologna near the university where Elena now taught a seminar on financial ethics twice a year, had large windows that caught the last of the evening light and a kitchen that smelled, on pasta nights, almost exactly like Forno Russo in the early mornings. She sat down at the table. Beatrice was doing mathematics. Elena looked at the numbers on the page and saw immediately the pattern the teacher was trying to illustrate, and she thought about whether to show Beatrice the shortcut or let her find it herself. She let her find it herself. That was the other thing she had learned, the most important thing, maybe, that none of the court filings or financial structures or legal strategies could teach you. That knowing the right answer too early can rob you of something you need. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit quietly and let the process work. 3 months after the verdict, Silvia Marchetti used the case as the foundation for a formal submission to the Italian Parliament's Finance Committee recommending amendments to the existing whistleblower protection statute. The submission cited specifically the 3 motions Varela's attorneys had filed to have Elena's evidence declared inadmissible. Motions that had been defeated, but that had nevertheless added 2 years and significant personal expense to an already grueling process. Silvia argued that the existing statute, as written, created procedural vulnerabilities that were regularly exploited by well-resourced defendants to wear down whistleblowers who lacked comparable legal infrastructure. She was right, and the committee knew she was right, and the amendments were passed 9 months later. They are officially known in the legislative record as the Russo-Marchetti provisions. They have already been cited in 4 subsequent whistleblower cases, 3 of which resulted in convictions that legal analysts have suggested would have failed without the new procedural protections. Elena gave one brief public statement on the day the provisions passed. She said, "I was lucky to find Silvia. Not everyone who sees what I saw will be lucky enough to find someone like her. That is why this matters." She also did something else, something that received less coverage but that the people who knew her story most closely identified as the most characteristic thing she did. She set up a fund. She called it the Luce Foundation, Luce meaning light in Italian, which was deliberate, and which was also the name Beatrice had given a stuffed rabbit at age 2. Which was less deliberate but felt right. The fund's purpose was straightforward: to provide financial and legal support to whistleblowers in financial and corporate settings who lacked the personal resources to sustain a long-form legal challenge. Priority was given to women. Priority was also given to cases in which the whistleblower had already identified a credible, documented legal basis for a claim but could not access qualified representation. The fund launched with an initial endowment of €800,000, which Elena provided from her own settlement proceeds. Within 18 months it had attracted additional donations, bringing the total corpus to 3.2 million euros. It had funded partial legal costs in 11 cases. 2 of those cases had already concluded with convictions. 3 were ongoing. 6 were in early stage assessment. Silvia Marchetti sits on the advisory board. So does Francesca Rao. So does a retired financial investigator from the UIF who had been part of the team that executed the search warrants on the night of the gala. He told Elena at the board's first meeting that he'd been doing that job for 22 years and had never seen a case with documentation that precise. She told him it was just accounting. He said it was not just accounting. He was right. Beatrice is 11 now. She is quiet in the way her mother is quiet, not shy exactly, but observant. Tuned to frequencies that most people don't bother to listen to. She plays the violin. She is very good at mathematics, which Elena was careful not to push, and which Beatrice arrived at independently, the way you arrive at things that are true about you. She knows the full story of what her mother did. Elena told it to her in pieces over several years, calibrating each piece to what Beatrice was old enough to carry. The last piece, the full legal and financial detail, she shared on Beatrice's 10th birthday, sitting at the kitchen table with the afternoon light coming through the large windows. Beatrice listened all the way through without interrupting. Then, she asked 3 questions, all of them precise. All of them aimed at the parts of the story that were most complicated. The second question was about why the regulatory official had not been caught earlier, given that the financial connection was visible in the documents Elena had noted. The answer required a 20-minute explanation of regulatory compartmentalization and institutional incentive structures. Elena gave her all 20 minutes. Beatrice nodded slowly and then said, "That's inefficient." Elena said, "Yes, that's why we're working on it." There is an image that comes back when Elena thinks about that night at the Meridian Grand. Not Dominic's face when he called her swollen and pathetic. Not the frozen guests. Not even the walk to the door. What she sees is the locket. She'd worn it for 14 months. Through the early days with Marco, through the discovery of the discrepancy, through Dominic's dinner invitation and the 2 years inside the organization, through the pregnancy and the grief and the phone call from Mirabella and the letter to Sylvia and everything that followed. She wore it because Marco had given it to her the night he asked her to trust him. And because trusting him had not been ultimately a mistake, he had not been the one who discarded her. He had died, which is different. He had been a flawed man in a complicated world, but he had loved her with whatever he had. She wore it because it was hers, and it was real. When she took it off the night before the gala, she held it for a long time in her palm. She thought about what it meant to carry something, and what it meant to set it down. Not to throw it. Not to break it. Just to put it somewhere and say, "I have carried this long enough, and I have somewhere else to put my hands." Dominic looked at the locket on that table like it was garbage. He had looked at her the same way 16 months after Marco died in the study with the cold light, and told her to go back to Mirabella. She went back to Mirabella. She went back, and she built, and she remembered, and she waited, and she worked. The locket stayed in a small dish on the dresser in her room in her mother's house, and then in the apartment she eventually rented in Rome to be close to Sylvia's office, and then in the house in Bologna. It is still there. She does not wear it anymore, but she has not thrown it away. Beatrice has asked about it twice. Both times Elena has said, "It's from before. It belongs to before." And both times Beatrice has accepted that, the way children accept things that they sense are held with care. She will tell Beatrice the whole story of the locket one day. Not yet. Beatrice already knows more than most adults know about how the world actually runs. The locket is a small piece. It can wait. What cannot wait is the work. The fund. The cases. The amendments and the people they protect. The seminars on financial ethics that Elena teaches twice a year at the university where she is not especially famous anymore, the viral moment has passed. The way viral moments do, but where she is known among students as the professor who does not give you the easy answer, who waits until you find it yourself, who will sit in silence for 40 seconds after a question before she speaks because she wants you to feel the weight of the problem before she helps you lift it. She told a seminar class, in the second year of teaching, something she had not planned to say. It came out in the middle of a discussion about the ethics of internal reporting, when to speak, who to tell, what it costs you to say what you've seen. A student asked, not unkindly, was it worth it? Everything you went through, was it actually worth it? She was quiet for a moment. Not the performance of being quiet, actually quiet. Then she said, I don't think worth is the right frame. Worth implies a transaction. You give something, you get something, you assess the exchange. What I did was not a transaction. I found something true, and I reported it, and I faced what came with that, and I built what needed to be built. I didn't do it because it would be worth it. I did it because I didn't know how to do otherwise. A student in the back row said, softly, that's what worth it looks like. Elena looked at her for a moment. Then she said, maybe. She moved on to the next question. There was always a next question. That was one of the things she'd come to love most about teaching. The questions never stopped. Every year, new people came in and asked the same essential thing in new language, from their own particular angle of confusion or hope or skepticism, and every year you had to find a new way to help them see it. It was not unlike accounting, actually, a different kind of pattern recognition, a different set of numbers, but the same fundamental act, seeing what is true and saying so, and refusing to set it down until someone else has seen it too. 7 years. That is the arc. 7 years from the moment she walked out of the Meridian Grand Hotel to the morning she sat at a university table with the light coming through the window and waited for a student to find the answer herself. 7 years is long enough to become someone different, long enough to grow a child from infancy into a girl who asks precise questions, long enough to build a fund a statute, change a law, and teach a class, long enough to forget what the locket felt like around your neck, and to be glad of the forgetting. Dominic Varela is serving a reduced sentence of 6 years in a federal correctional facility outside Milan. His attorney has filed one additional appeal that is currently pending. Silvia Marchetti has reviewed the grounds for that appeal and describes them, privately, as imaginative. The legal community's consensus is similar. The Varela Group, under court-appointed administration, has sold the majority of its hospitality holdings. The construction portfolio is being wound down. The name will be gone from the corporate registry within the year. There is no one left to carry it forward. Marco's death ended the line of succession, and Dominic's conviction ended the line of trust. An organization that took 50 years to build took 11 months of trial to dismantle. This is the part of the story that some people find satisfying in a simple way. The powerful man falls, the wronged woman rises, the math balances out. And Elena understands that feeling. She has felt something like it herself in quieter moments, but she is careful about it. She does not think of her life as the story of a villain's defeat. She thinks of it as the story of work, of the specific, unspectacular, non-cinematic discipline of knowing something true and refusing to be talked out of it by anyone, not by grief, not by fear, not by the smooth confidence of powerful men who have never in their lives been seriously questioned. She thinks about the flour, the specific weight of it in a measuring cup, the way it settles when you tap the side, the way Nana Bay's hands moved through it like she was greeting something she'd known all her life. She thinks about her mother saying a woman needed something reliable. She thinks she understood that differently then than she understands it now. Reliability, it is not a glamorous word. It does not make the news the way verdicts do. But it is the thing that actually matters, the quality of continuing to show up, to do the work correctly, to remain oriented toward what is true even when the room is frozen and the most powerful man at the table is looking at you like you are something he's already decided to discard. She showed up. 14 years, she kept showing up. Bakery, university, boardroom, kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a legal pad and a laptop, delivery room, courthouse steps, seminar table. She showed up in every room and she did the work and she was reliable. That is the whole story. Everything else, the verdict, the fund, the law, the 4 million views, those are the consequences of the work. The work is not the consequences. The work is the showing up every time and doing it right, If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself at any point sitting forward a little, holding your breath through the gala or the verdict or the seminar, please consider sharing it. Not because views are the point, but because there is someone watching who needs to hear this right now. Someone who found something true and doesn't know yet whether they can afford to say so. Someone who has been called something diminishing by someone who wanted them to stop. Someone who is in the early years of the 7 years and cannot yet see the end of them. Share it for them. Leave a comment if something in this story surprised you, or shifted something, or reminded you of someone you know. And subscribe if you want more stories like this one, stories about the particular kind of power that doesn't announce itself, that wears navy dresses and carries legal pads and weights. The question I want to leave you with is this: what do you do with what you know? When you see the crack in the wall, when the numbers don't add up, when the room goes quiet, and the powerful man has spoken, and everyone seems to be waiting for you to decide that you imagined it, what do you do? I think about this every time I tell a story like Elena's. I think about the gap between knowing something and doing something about it. About how many people see what Elena saw and set it down, because they cannot imagine carrying it alone through the years it will take. And I understand that. The weight is real, the years are real, the loneliness of it is real. But here's what really gets me. What keeps coming back. At the end of Francesca Rao's profile, the piece that 800,000 people read, the one that made a hashtag trend and sent a video viral and changed, in some small permanent way, how Italian law treats people who see the truth and say so, Francesca asked Elena one final question. She asked, was there a moment when you almost stopped? When the weight of it was enough that you almost set it down and let it go? Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she said there was a night. Beatrice was maybe 2. It was 3 in the morning and she was sick, not seriously, just a fever, and I was sitting on the floor of the bathroom with her on my lap, and I was exhausted in a way I don't think I can explain to anyone who hasn't been through it. And I thought, what if I just stopped? What if I sent Sylvia a letter in the morning and said I can't do this anymore? I need to go back to the bakery and just be someone's daughter and someone's mother and not do this? She paused. Then she said, and then Beatrice looked up at me with those dark eyes and said something in the half-awake way that small children do. Something I couldn't quite make out, and then she went back to sleep in my arms. And I sat there on the bathroom floor thinking about her name. Beatrice, named for my grandmother, who taught me that a woman needs something reliable. She looked at Francesca across the table and said, I was that reliable thing. For her. So I couldn't stop. I keep coming back to that. I keep thinking about the bathroom floor. About 3 in the morning, about the moment when the reasons you started feel very far away and the weight is very close. Tell me, what is the floor you've been sitting on? What is the thing that keeps you getting back up? Because I think about these stories as conversations, not lectures. And I think you have a version of this story somewhere in your own life. Not necessarily a mafia organization. Not necessarily a legal battle. But a true thing you've been carrying. And a moment on a floor. And a reason you got back up anyway. Leave that in the comments, I read them. And so, sometimes do the people who needed to hear this story and don't quite believe yet that someone else is carrying something similar. You are not alone on the floor. That is what this story is actually about.